Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to this episode. I have a really exciting conversation with Rio, my dear friend, and I'm just so excited to share this one with you. It feels so alive. You know that I usually hold on to my conversation for some time and let myself feel the impact of the conversation, and this one wants to be shared pretty much right away. And we spoke about a lot of different topics, and Rio introduced herself. We spoke about how we met within the episode, so I'm not gonna repeat that. But to me, a lot of the theme that we really explored in this conversation is the idea of the direct experience. Very often, when we are walking a spiritual path, we can stumble upon maps like astrology or maybe even like tarot and almost give our power away to the map. And to me, the heart of this conversation with Rio really has to do with allowing one's own direct experience to inform one's spiritual path and to get quite practiced, as Rio exemplified so beautifully in this conversation, to get quite practiced at trusting the direct experience to lead us to the modalities and the practices and, frankly, to the creative processes that are actually resonant with us. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with Rio. All right. Hi, Rio. Thank you for being
Hello.
here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I was thinking about how to introduce you from my perspective to the listeners. And what's coming up for me was that we studied astrology together in
Mhm.
2020. Over the years, we've just been on each other's mailing list, and I've really enjoyed reading your writing and hearing how you've been. You always kind of struck me as someone who's on this adventure path for some reason. Like I always see you like having really cool adventures both internally and externally. And then recently we got together for your podcast, and
Mhm.
that was the first time we sat across from one another digitally in years. And not to put you on the spot or make you blush super hard, Rio, but I felt so attracted to your energy. Like there was just something emanating from your being that felt so palpable. I feel kind of the joy with which you infuse your life. And it's interesting because in one of the modalities I practice is human design, and you can kind of tell, I feel like for me at least, I can kind of tell when someone's living in a way that's correct for them. And
Mhm.
your presence when we were in conversation, and also the places we went to in our conversation, which was kind of crazy, to be really honest with you, um, to me tells me that this person's like walking a path that's correct for them, or at least correct for them in this moment. And so that's I just want to reflect that back to you and share that with the
Aw.
listeners. Like I wasn't even really planning on like having a guest for a while on the podcast, but our conversation cracked something within me, and I was like, I have to have you over. So here we are.
Well, thank you for having me. That's really nice to hear. I do try to always follow the path that we only get this one life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so we want to do it right. And it has been quite an adventure, and I've tried for things and failed spectacularly. And that's part of what we were talking about in our conversation, right? We got to be down to get messy sometimes.
Yeah.
And, you're a person who you've always just had, I've found a very expansive view. And I wanted to bring you on the podcast because I knew that we could touch tricky subjects without it getting doom and gloom and still
Mm.
being able to like see it from that really expansive place. And you did not disappoint at all. And I'm so happy that we were reconnecting.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's so nice to hear. To begin, would you like to introduce yourself, Rio, to the listeners? I was curious if maybe there's a story from your life that feels interesting to you and maybe you feel reflect who you are in this moment.
Hmm. Um, Well, one thing that's on my mind, and it feels very Leo full moon, I'm in the process of writing a proposal for an arts grant, and I've sort of had to like look at my life as a story, and I've been trying to kind of like write it as the hero's journey, because I want people to be whoever's reading to be invested in what it is that I'm doing, and I grew up like as a tiny little baby artist, and I always had a pencil in my hand, and that's always what I was doing. And I moved around a lot until like I changed schools every year until grade 5,
Mm.
until I finally landed at an art school.
Mm.
And then I had all of these like big shiny dreams, and I went to an art college, and then I had like full blown mental breakdown, had to drop
Mm.
out.
Mm.
And then I went on this like whole gigantic healing journey. And really, just like in the past year, I'm finally like coming back to that part of myself and being like, oh, like we can be whole. We can take
Mm.
everything that we've learned in this healing journey. We, like I'm talking about multiple people, but you know how it is.
Yeah, multiple
We
parts of
can
yourself across
exactly.
dimensions and timelines. Yeah.
I can take everything that I've learned from these like healing journeys and my scholarly pursuits in astrology, and that artist part of myself can like
Mm.
still be a part of myself. And I've been really exploring this idea lately that um I've finally banished this idea in my head that like an artist isn't a real job,
Mm.
you know?
Mm.
Because for a long time, like I knew it logically, but I still didn't like feel it in my soul.
Yeah.
And so lately I've really banished that, and I'm sort of stepping into that and deciding how to weave these parts of myself together.
Wow. Wow. I'm blown away hearing your story actually, because I didn't realize we shared that in common, which
Oh,
is the
really?
experience of always knowing that you're an artist and then having maybe the more kind of what I'm hearing from you is like the more traditional art path essentially breaking you down, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I got to college, and because I'd gone to a very, very specialized school from grade 5 to grade 12,
Mm.
and I was suddenly like saddled with a lot of um, student loans that I didn't expect I would have to be taking out. And then everything that I was learning is stuff that I'd like learned in grade 9, and I couldn't, I lost it
Yeah. Yeah.
under the pressure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm curious to hear if you feel like sharing what's your relationship to that pressure that art making can bring up in this
Hmm.
chapter of your life. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've always worked pretty well under pressure. That
Mm.
was just too much, because I had a lot of scarcity running through my system, and I
Mm.
had other journeys I had to go on, I guess.
Mm.
But in general, like I do, I do like to work under pressure. I'll like leave things to the end to give myself time pressure a lot, which is something I'm trying to get out of. But I feel like with art, especially these days, everything is so polarized. Sometimes say, it's hard to talk about things with nuance.
Mm,
And with art, you don't really need language.
mm.
And you can um, just tap into some stuff that's kind of beyond language.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's really cool that you're bringing this up in this moment because I've been feeling that too. Yesterday was the full moon and I was feeling really out of it. And when I checked in with myself, the only thing that I felt available for was making music because
Mm.
I didn't have to know what I think or I didn't have to accomplish anything in particular. So
Mhm.
I'm curious if you would want to talk to folks a little bit about like if you have any offering or anything like that
Oh,
at the
well,
moment.
I don't have anything. I do offer readings,
Hmm.
um, sort of all of the time. I am an astrologer and I use constellational astrology.
Yeah.
So we use the actual size and placements of the constellations in the sky, which is really cool.
Mm.
And I find that I'm a transit reader more so than a natal chart reader, just
Mm.
because I am not in the business of telling people who they are. And what I like to do, though, what I think astrology is super, super useful for is providing context, especially in like perhaps harder moments.
Mm.
If I can point to a picture of the sky and be like, oh, hey, did you notice this really hard thing is happening? I just feel like it can provide people moments of certainty and faith. And I can sort of translate the lesson that's being asked of us, right? Because we are all, in my opinion, souls on a journey that are here
Mm.
to learn. And when hard things happen, it's usually just asking for something a little more of us,
Yeah.
can even
Yeah.
be like more tenderness at times. But so I consider myself like a translator in that way.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I don't have anything really available at the moment, but I also make like calendars and planners. If you want to track me down and follow me for when the next round of those comes out, I'm very, very proud of the love and intention I put in those.
Mm. Mm. Um, I'll make sure to have all of your links in the show
Hmm.
notes as well. Yeah, so
And maybe
folks
just
can
my
follow
like
you.
newsletter link because
Your
that's my
newsletter.
favorite place to talk to people.
Okay. Speaking of astrology, I definitely want to hear your practice. I want to hear about, I think you practice 13 sign true
I do.
sidereal astrology, right?
Yeah.
I want to hear. I want to hear about what that is, but for some reason, I kind of want you to tell your story about it. Like, I want
Yeah.
to hear
Fair.
how you got there, like how you ended up learning this specific kind of lens on astrology, and
Hmm.
the ebb and flow of your relationship with it.
Okay. Well, honestly, I appreciate you giving me the chance to tell this story.
Mm,
I feel like within the larger sort of mainstream tropical community, it's often very assumed that like anyone who uses a fucus is just like very confused.
yeah.
Like they just don't understand. They're just confused. And my experience of that has been such the opposite. This community that I have found is just like really full of very curious people who are actually like very learned. And
Mm.
I love the chance to talk. So thank you. Um yeah, so I've made calendars for a lot of years now. And the first version I ever made, I was like, ooh, it was just like I made it for my friends and family and like put some baby pictures and stuff in it. But I was like, but why don't I put like the new and full moons in?
Mm.
And so I did that. And then the idea of sidereal came sort of into my life a little bit. And I was checking it out, and that is the system that's used by like Vedic practitioners. where the zodiac is still divided into 30-degree pieces, but it is adjusted for the change over
The
the past.
procession.
The
Hmm.
procession. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And so I was like running my sidereal chart on astro.com. And at first I was like very unimpressed. I was like, no, absolutely not. No way. you know, this idea that I could possibly, strangely enough, of all the placements that offended me, the idea that I could not be a Scorpio Pluto, I was just like, absolutely not. And it's funny, I say to people, anything that you hold really, really strong resonance, you'll still find in your chart somehow,
Mm.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean I'm not a Scorpio Pluto? Well, according to this system, I'm not. But my Pluto is opposite Mars in the eighth house, square my nodes. So I kind of am.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
so I went through a period where I was like, that's ridiculous. No. But it just, something about it kept like pulling me back and being like, but maybe. And so the next year when I made my calendar, I was like, I don't know about this. I'm going to make myself one separate calendar and have the like new and full moons in the sidereal system.
Mm.
So I did that and I would compare every month. And I started to find that I was like, I do feel like I'm finding more resonance with these sidereal placements. And so then I started to wonder, okay, well, it seems like the stars matter. And so if the stars matter, don't all the stars matter? And
Mm.
so I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, starting to learn more of the astronomy aspect of it. And I found a video by my colleague, Michael Hartigan, who I watched this video and everything just clicked. And I was like, nope, this is the way. And through that
Mm.
video, I saw that there were some people that were actually using like the actual size of the constellations,
Mm.
which makes things slightly more complicated, right? It's like there's a lot of much more like simple geometry in tropical or even the regular sidereal because every sign is 30 degrees apart. It's sort of easy peasy.
Mm.
But I don't know, when I found this particular modality, everything just clicked for me. And
Mm.
I'd spent over a decade at this point stuffing my brain with astrological knowledge, and something about this particular modality just like really anchored in. And suddenly, instead of all these disparate pieces of information that I had, I could look
Yeah.
at a chart and I could like wow people, sort of, you know. Not that
Mm.
it's about wowing people, but I could look at a chart and suddenly like really put it together and just, this might sound a little crazy, but like access the cosmic planes better.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I I really love this story, Rio, because I am also a multimodality practitioner. And
Mm-hmm.
something I found is people can get so dogmatic in
Mm-hmm.
how they practice the system that works for them
Mm-hmm.
without taking into account the reality that we're really vessels for the tools. We're really vessels for the language. And we all have different resonances to different systems. Just like how sometimes I would, give an astrology reading to someone who, like, basically has no response to it. And then I
Mm-hmm.
would give them a tarot reading and they would really light up. Like things make a lot of sense to them, right? So if that can happen on the receiving end, why couldn't that also happen on the giving end? And earlier you mentioned a lot of people in the tropical community being really closed off to different like other types of astrology. I kind of wanted to talk to you about that if you are open to it because I sense that a lot of people who got into astrology have this desire for kind of academic authority validation.
Mm.
And there's like big names, associated
Mhm.
who practice tropical astrology, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I love some of these big names. And also for me, to your point earlier, when people are so like resistant to something, there's probably something there for them, right?
Mhm.
And don't we owe it to ourselves to explore? Like hearing your story, Rio, I was so struck by how similar your story is to my story with human design.
Mm.
Because I really didn't want to be associated with human design. I'm like, what is this system? It was channeled by this white man from Canada. I was like, rah, rah, rah.
It
But
does have a wacky story.
it does have a very wacky story, right? But the longer I practice and the longer I explore human design, it's really weird because I've never been able to guess people's sun sign or rising sign correctly through tropical astrology. Um, but with human design, I always get people's types. Not always, but a lot of
Yeah,
the
you
times
called
I get people.
mine.
I called yours, right? Because you spoke in a way that I was like, is Rio a splenic projector?
She is.
so, so yeah, I thought that was really funny.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I'm curious to actually hear you talk a little bit more about your relationship with astrology in general, and specifically, I'm remembering there was one email you sent, Rio, that really struck me, which was you had spoken about temporarily shifting away from astrology. Like you
Hmm.
felt like you didn't really want to talk about
Oh
astrology. I
yeah,
think you
how would you
spoke
don't know?
about, yeah, you spoke about your pregnancy, your experiences with, yeah, with being a mother and parenting, and um also your miscarriage. And then you spoke about not wanting to do astrology for some time.
Hmm.
So I'm curious to hear now that you're kind of an astrologer, or you're playing the role of an astrologer
Hmm.
again in this chapter. Yeah, I'd love to hear about your relationship with astrology and that ebb and flow.
For sure. Um, yeah, my experiences being pregnant have been very interesting. And when I was pregnant with my daughter, I got very, very into, well, I free birthed my daughter, actually. I had her, it was just in my like off-grid cabin without a
Mm.
midwife. She
Whoa.
was there eventually, but that was sort of how I wanted it by the time that she came. I had really, really immersed myself in, learning about natural birth, and it felt like something that she was asking of me. And it's kind of hard to know how far to go into this story because it's interesting. But me and this particular little soul, I believe anyways, she was the baby that I miscarried. And um and even prior to that, when I was a lot younger, when I was like 21, I had an abortion, and I believe that she was the soul that wanted to come in then as well. And while I was pregnant with her, I was just like filled with a lot of intensity that like this is what I was doing and this is what I was focused on. And it felt like she needed that from me. Like we'd had so many stop and starts that like this is how she was coming into the world, and it was like a giant trust exercise,
Mm.
basically.
Mm.
And during that time, I felt like I was probably going to shift entirely into more of just supporting women and going into more like birth work and that sort of thing. And then I found that after some time of her being outside of me, it has always been an interest of mine, and I will be like weaving it into my work in certain ways. But I found with time of her outside of me that maybe like a lot of that passion that was firing in me at the time was actually her. And she's just got
Whoa.
this like wild, courageous warrior spirit inside of her.
Mm-hmm.
And when
Mm.
we were together in the same body, um, yeah, I mean, it's huge. Birth is one of the hugest initiations you'll go through, right? And so while I was in it, I was really giving it my all. But as far as to speak to what you were saying about my relationship with astrology, it has been a little bit on and off. And part of that is because, a lot of people who are in spiritual spaces and are doing a lot of seeking, and, I'm not just putting this on the other, I've found it within myself a lot too. It can become really, really easy to do one of two things. One of which is to like completely disembody and focus like entirely on mental knowledge that we can
Mm,
fill ourselves with. And
mhm,
the other thing is to look for something outside of ourselves to give us answers about who we are, you know, and to
yeah.
like go to a person, tell me who I am, go to a system, tell me who I am. And lots of times we are like reaching to outside systems to try and find knowledge that actually like lives inside of us. And
Mm,
what it actually requires from us is slowing down and listening.
mm,
And so, the pendulum always swings like too far one direction and then too far the other direction. And the goal is to find a middle, right? But I have struggled with times where I'm like, oh, where I've maybe put myself in situations where I've like abandoned myself a little bit too much. And then
mm.
in response to that, been like, oh no, I can't lead other people on this path. I got to shut it down entirely. When like really the and I've tried to put it down a couple of times, but it is something that I have a skill with, and it's something that I have found I can offer people like real help with, right?
Yeah.
So in the end, it came down to deciding how to work with it in ways that just like felt authentic to me, which I sort of
Mm,
spoke to in the beginning about how like I'm a transit reader. I like to provide people that like faith and optimism and anchor points more so than being like, this is who you are. I don't like
yeah.
being in the business if this is who you are.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, when I'm speaking to placements that are being like very activated at a time, yes, I will speak about your natal chart, of course. But I
Mm,
don't like trying to just like paint a picture for someone
mhm, mhm.
necessarily. And even when I am when I did a lot of like face-to-face natal chart readings, a technique I would always use is to ask people questions instead of
Mm,
like telling them directly. I'll be like,
yeah.
do you find,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I thought that, I don't know, it just evokes more of a sense of curiosity and it's more of a co-creation.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about a couple things. First of all, your story with being pregnant with your daughter just
Mhm.
gave me the whole time you were speaking, I just kept getting chills, like whole body chills. So I just want to
Yeah.
reflect that to you. That felt so potent, and I don't know if you would use this word, but the word that came up for me was initiation.
100%
Um, yeah,
fully.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I think the other piece that you brought in too made me think, about not wanting to tell people who they are. Makes me think about you also being a Virgo rising. And this idea of being a transit astrologer, I think as a fellow Virgo rising, even though
Mhm.
we're kind of speaking slightly different languages and looking at things through slightly different lenses,
Mhm.
really resonate with me. And that's what I've, kind of living into the system I've been practicing, the astrology system I've been practicing has led me to that conclusion as well, a
Mhm.
lot of the times, and
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're so spot on in that the spiritual the spiritual path or the seeker path, the mystic path can be quite treacherous,
Mhm.
and in fact, I'm curious to hear what you think about this, but what I've learned over and over again are actually the path shows me places where I'm so ready to give my power away to some outside
Mhm.
source.
Mhm. I was gonna say too, like we don't realize sometimes the amount of power that people are giving to us when they come to us in consultation like this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've had a lot of really personal lessons this year about the ways in which I give my power away. And
Yeah.
yeah, like if I could give an example, it's somewhat different, but like just like the pitfalls are so many and come in guises that we don't even see. Like I was living in an off-grid cabin that I had me and my husband had built it together,
Mm.
and living sort of far away from society. And there were things that were absolutely true about that. There was a lot of things that I wanted to teach my children about, like just actual good skills to have. And I wanted to live close and in harmony with the land. And deep, super below all of that was also this thread of like, if I can just live off grid and like never have to pay bills, that would be great. And from an objective standpoint, yes, it absolutely would be great to just live and not have to pay any fucking bills. Great, 100%. And like even lower below that was this part where like I didn't actually believe that I could take care of myself in
Mm.
a modern, like within the modern like capitalist system. I felt so victimized that I just like told myself that I couldn't. And
Mm.
then push came to shove in my personal life where I had to change and come back to the city. And in coming back to the city, I realized just like how silly that was. And
Mm.
that it was like just this really deep seated belief where I really didn't like the idea of like have making money was so horrible. And like in the end,
Mm.
it wasn't that big of a deal, but I had like convinced myself that I couldn't. And I
Yeah.
do think like within the spiritual sort of realm, there's a lot of people that are trying to like find their way back to God and like
Mm.
back to source and back to the whole. And it can be, I even catch myself all the time with like advertising and stuff like that. It can just like feel so easy to give that responsibility away and be like, oh, you say you have the answer? Yes, please tell me the answer. We see
Yeah.
it in our relationship with government as
Mm.
well.
Mm.
Oh,
Mhm.
daddy government, come save us. I think it's a natural inclination that, yeah, it would be great if someone came and had all the answers for us. But at the end of the
Yes.
day, like, we're here and we got to do it ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to hear you speak more about your relationship with God, with the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know that's kind of a huge question, so um, if I can narrow it down, I would be happy to. But I'll just offer it as an
Mm-hmm.
open question mark there
Okay.
for you. Yeah,
Um, can I tell a personal story? Well, I guess I've got a couple.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so um, I remember when I was young, one of my very first memories, I'm reading through this like little kid's Bible. And I remember just being like so confused. And I was like, this isn't it.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I would just like stay with that confusion for like many years, really, until I learned about the concept of reincarnation. And when I heard about that, something just clicked. And I was like, yes, that is how it works. And so this is just something that like has always been a knowing in my system, anyways.
Mm. Mhm.
And I was I mean, this isn't quite about God, but I was like quite connected to like the spiritual realms when I was young. And then as I got older, you know, it was very uncool to like think that God was real or anything like that. And I grew up in a very non-religious household. So as I went up higher in the grades, I sort of just like assimilated the programming that like there is no God.
Mm.
And then I partnered with someone who was very, very atheist and, young girl giving away all sorts of stuff for love and affection, the classic tale. And so I lived my life in a very disconnected way for many years where I was staunchly atheist, which is hilarious to me now, but it was a
Mm.
phase, you know.
Mhm.
And then yeah, I'm going into personal story territory, but I had a lot of deaths in my family when I was young.
Mm.
And in 2013, when my grandma got very, very sick, he was someone who I was very close to. And I made this commitment to myself where I was like, throughout my life, I've sort of been all over the place supporting people who are grieving, you know, which is fine and good. But you know, my grandma's dying. I was like, I'm going to be there for her.
Mm.
And so I quit everything that I was doing and I went and I spent some time with her. And we just had this like beautiful couple of months of getting very, very close before her death.
Mm. Mhm.
And then the day came, you know, she was in the hospital. We all gathered around and sang her songs. And she was like so drugged that she couldn't even talk at this point. But at one point, the drugs start to wear off. And she sat up and she looked me like dead in the eyes and booped me on the nose. And then they like came and gave her more morphine and she was sort of just drugged out. I didn't think too terribly much of it, but the nighttime came and this like strange sort of calm came upon me. And I
Mm.
suddenly like knew exactly what I had to do.
Mm.
And I went to my mom and my uncle, her kids, and I was like, you need to go. And they're like, what do you mean we need to go? And I'm like, she's not going to go if you guys are here. She won't leave with her babies here. Like, you need to go. And I convinced them, and they did. And it was just me and my grandpa, who was asleep in the bed beside her, holding her hand.
Mm.
And it was the strangest thing. Just this like knowing came over me. I did this little ceremony with her where I like rubbed butterfly wings on her hands and her feet and said a little prayer and sat with her for a little bit. And then I just knew it was time. And so I got up out of the hospital room and I went to the waiting room and
Mm.
laid down to sleep. And I was in this half sleep, not sleeping, not awake zone when I felt her father and her brother, who have been dead for years, blink back into existence. They walked past me, up the hall, into her room, picked her up, walked past, back past me again as if to say goodbye, and then all three of them blinked out of existence. I got up, go down the hall, nurse is there, they're like, she's gone. I'm like, I know.
Mm.
And that was just such an awakening for me where I realized that like all of these boxes that I've built around like what facts are and what is real and what is true and
Mm.
you know if you don't have your like peer reviewed studies then it's not real sort of attitude was just absolutely shattered and I realized that like oh actually I had no idea no clue about what was real and what wasn't and there was so much more going on behind the surface and
Mm.
during that weekend, one of her good friends taught me how to pray. And she was like, you know, God will always answer you if you ask. You just have to ask out loud. And I remember at the time being like, whatever, lady, why are you talking to me about this? And, you know, within all of this, like, really, really nice, profound story was also another, like, not great story where I was like very addicted to opiates and
Mm.
like having a bad time, you know, and I didn't want to hear some lady telling me about how to pray, right?
Yeah.
And it would actually take me like a couple years after that to actually start praying. I remember I had this day where like I just didn't know what to do. And I'd taken myself as far as I could. And I was like post breakup of my first major relationship. And I had no idea what to do. And I thought about Pam, who had told me how to pray. And I was like, all right, let's try it. And I
Mm.
did. And I also started like speaking to my grandma out loud and
Mm.
speaking to all of my ancestors who had left already out
Mm.
loud, and my life completely changed like in an instant. And suddenly I wasn't just a lone person walking around struggling. I was a person like having a conversation with the universe, and it was answering me back. And since then, I haven't really looked back.
Wow, it's profound. I can I tell you what I love about your story?
Sure.
I love that it was so rooted in your personal experience.
Mhm.
It was as if like reality itself was speaking to you. The divine itself was speaking to you through your life and through the people around you.
Mhm.
And yeah, that makes so much sense to me,
Mhm.
actually. And I feel like that's if there's such a thing as spirituality, is that, like recognizing the miracle and the wonder of our experience.
Mhm. And I think that
Hmm.
it is that, everything is always speaking to us. Everything can be a message, and if we, and that can go, right? We don't want to swing the pendulum too far, right? But that is a little bit of, sometimes we can, what does it hurt to employ a little magical thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
Give it a try and see what happens. At the very least, it is a better story and a slightly more fun way to go through your day. And if
Yeah.
you start like speaking to the universe, to God, whatever you want to call it, to, people who've loved you that are no longer in this plane, like just try it and see what speaks back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about, Rio, was about snakes.
Okay.
I heard you talk a little bit about snakes in one of your I think it was for the Lunar New Year
Mhm.
video that you did on your YouTube. And yeah, I was drawn to having you speak more to that. Whatever's coming up in this moment, like what have snakes taught you about life, about transformation, about yourself?
I feel like I'm quite a chaotic person. I came in as a life path 5, and my life has just been constant change, whether it was like moving 6 times before 6 schools, more than 6 times before grade 5, or just everything. I follow the adventure, and that results in a million new beginnings and deaths that are beginnings. And I think the snake is just like a really powerful totem for remaining flexible and being able to enjoy what we have while we have it, while also being able to not hold on too tightly and slither on out when it's time to slither on out.
Mm, mm, wow, thank you. That's
Yeah.
really beautiful.
I've always been
Yeah.
drawn to snakes. I think that probably like because I have this sort of chaotic system, I have always been drawn to snakes. So uh, the guides we need arrive when we need them is a belief of mine.
Mm,
Mhm.
mm, beautiful. On that note,
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for you and for this conversation. Um, any final any final words before we close out? Um yeah, anything maybe that I haven't asked or that hasn't come up in this conversation that feels that feels alive and that you want to share?
Mm. Well, something that I wanted to bring up earlier when we were talking about my path with
Mm,
13 sign astrology is, a fucus gets all the press. It's a whole like extra sign, and um honestly, at the end of the day, its mythology is very intertwined with Scorpio And functionally
Mm.
we can combine them in a lot of ways. And I think that the real magic is that we use the full signs of the full size, right? It just offers a very interesting richness and depth. And if you're curious at all about this, I would encourage you to come check out my YouTube page because that's sort of where I get into that a lot.
Mhm.
And, you know, I also think it's very someone who is a true channel is going to be able to speak truth in whatever language it is that they are using, right?
Yeah.
And I do think there is a lot of like rich symbolism within the tropical system. And if you go back to the ancient writings, it's all filled with things about stars. And they were all astronomers. And
Mm.
so if anyone feels curious, I encourage you to come check out the heretical little brother branch of astrology because it's a pretty wild time.
I love that. I love that. I feel like maybe that's a great place to land, and this idea of heresy is
Mm.
very alive. I love this conversation.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
Rio.
you so much for having me on to share my tales. It feels nice to be witnessed.
Of course. And I encourage everyone listening to check out Rio's YouTube. I'll have the link in the
Yeah,
show
thanks
notes.
for listening, everyone.